The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Network, and it is my pleasure to introduce another edition of Rangers Retro in the Zone, or as some call it, Retro Rangers in the Zone, with George Grimm. And here is my good friend and co-author, George Grimm.
Thank you, Ralph. Welcome back to the Retro Rangers podcast. I'm your host, George Grimm, and I'm here today with my guest, Reg Lansberry, the author of 9 Goals, which is the story of the New York Rangers' miraculous finish to the 1969-70 season. Reg is also the author of a very fine piece in a recent issue of the Hockey News, the numbers issue of the Hockey News, about the history of retired numbers in the NHL, which is why we're here today. So, Reg, what's the background of retired numbers in the NHL? How did that come about?
Well, George, as an initial matter, thank you as always for having me. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
It's always good to be here with you.
Yep. And the history of retired numbers, George, I'm proud to say for those of us that are passionate about hockey and the NHL, hockey was the first professional sport to retire a number. And that was the progenitor of retiring numbers across all professional sports, obviously primarily Major League Baseball, basketball, and the NFL, football. But in hockey's case, it was born from tragedy. On December 12, 1933, specifically at Boston Garden, where the Bruins were playing the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Boston's rugged future Hall of Fame defenseman Eddie Shore thought that one of the Maple Leafs had brought him down from behind. And Eddie essentially got up, picked the closest Maple Leaf to him, which sadly was Ace Bailey. And Ace Bailey was hit from behind by Eddie Shore. And if your listeners can try to visualize this, he cartwheeled over backwards. Eddie Shore hit him from behind very low.
Wow.
He somersaulted backwards and landed on his head.
Wow.
And suffered a grievous brain injury. He was very fortunate to live. He had 2 extremely delicate operations, especially in that era, the 1930s. He was very fortunate to live over the following 10 days.
Wow.
And that was December 19th, 1933, for anyone that wants to try to look up and delve into the history of it.
Right.
Well, excuse me, I'm going to interrupt. You certainly have my attention with the topic, and Ace Bailey, did he come back to play again or to live a normal life? What was his history?
Well, Ralph, his career ended that night. They inserted a plate in his skull. Luckily, he lived. But it was very classy of the Toronto Maple Leafs. They gave him a job for life. He was an off-ice official, most specifically the timekeeper at Maple Leaf Gardens for the next 46 years.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yes, it is.
And I don't want to get off topic. Ralph, I don't want to get off topic for your readers, but I'll just say that in the context of NHL history, and George will remember because we both saw his son play. His son's first name was Garnett, Garnet.
Right.
Garnett, and he was known as Ace Bailey, which he adopted in tribute to his father.
Right.
And he won 2 Stanley Cups with the Bobby Orr-era Bruins in 1970, and then against the Rangers in the 1972 final. And then more tragedy in the Bailey family would ensue. He was a scout for the Los Angeles Kings, and along with his fellow King scout, Mark Bavis, they were on a United Airlines flight from Boston to LAX on 9/11. They were on the second plane to hit the Twin Towers in New York.
Oh.
Yeah.
And, in terms of anyone that follows hockey closely, especially in Canada where it's part of their culture, that resonated over these past 20 years in a literal way.
Sure.
Well,
I think that's enough tragedy for any family.
I grew up as a hockey fan in New York and lived my adult life in California, and my heart was naturally with the tragedy, but I didn't know the story. I've been removed from day-to-day hockey, and wow, that is.
Well, I can just add for your listeners that with the 20th anniversary 2 months ago, there was a very affecting piece on NHL.com about the Kings organization and how they feel it acutely to this day, the loss of their two friends.
Mm. And I just want to say, too, this is so atypical of professional organizations in any sport in taking care of their own as if they were their own. So let's give that organization, Toronto, one bit of kudos there.
Yeah. Yes, and I did point that out in the piece.
Oh, good. Good, because I haven't read the piece, but the whole thing struck me immediately as being so wonderful. A corporation with a heart these days in any aspect of life is awfully nice. So, gentlemen, go on with your interview. I hogged it enough. I'll listen when I download it. Thank you for the interruption. Thanks for being here, sir. George,
yes, sir.
Continue.
There's a famous picture of Ace Bailey and Eddie Shaw shaking hands, which happened, I guess, later on when they retired his number, Reg?
Well, actually, that photo was taken 3 months later when the Bruins were at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Okay.
And George, for your passionate hockey fans, that photo would be considered, without question, especially in Canada, among the four most famous photos of the 20th century. And the other three would be Bobby Orr's winning goal to win the 19th Stanley Cup on Sunday, May 10th, where he's in midair.
That's right.
As he scored in the same motion, Noel Picard, the Blues defenseman, tripped him up. And as I mentioned in my book, 9 Goals, Bobby always admitted he kind of embellished it. He felt the trip, and he helped it by going airborne, which made it a famous photo.
Yeah, well, you might as well.
Another one would be, and I didn't mention the photo itself, but it's in my piece as well, when Bill Barilko, the Maple Leafs defenseman, and so here's your second dose of tragedy. 3 months after he scored the Stanley Cup winning goal in 1951 in overtime, that photo of him scoring it, he also is in midair. He left his skates as he was taking a wrist shot to beat Jerry McNeil and win the Stanley Cup. His plane was lost on a fishing trip in Canada. That photo is famous, and it also became historic for a notable reason, George. The 1951 Stanley Cup Final was the first one in history where every game was decided in sudden death overtime.
Wow.
All 5 games.
Wow.
And then the fourth photo would be the famous 1953 Stanley Cup Final where Rocket Richard had come back from a third period concussion. scored to win the Stanley Cup in overtime, and you see him shaking hands with the Bruins goalie, Sugar Jim Henry, as blood is trickling down from the Rocket's left eye.
Right, and he's obviously concussed. If you look at his face, he's not there. His eyes are glazed over, and he's just, you can tell that there's something wrong with it.
Exactly. But I will say, just to carry through for your listeners, just one little tidbit about Ace Bailey, which I mentioned later in the piece. When he was working at Maple Leaf Gardens in 1964, Ron Ellis, who had been on the Toronto Marlboros and won the 1964 Memorial Cup, made the Maple Leafs as a rookie. And after 3 years, Ron became an important player on that team, along with the Big M, Frank Mahovlich, Red Kelly, Johnny Bower, Terry Sawchuk in goal. They won the 1967 Stanley Cup, the last one Toronto has won.
That's right.
And the following summer, during training camp, Ace Bailey had been admiring Ron Ellis, and he went up to him and asked him if he would be interested in wearing Ace's number 6. And in concert with my piece, Ace's number 6 was the very first number the NHL ever retired.
Yeah.
More specifically, Toronto. And so Ron was honored to wear it. He wore it for the rest of his career. And when Ron Ellis was named to Team Canada in 1972, he wore number 6 as a tribute to Ace Bailey. And Ron was extremely important on Team Canada. He played on a line with Bobby Clark of the Flyers at center, Paul Henderson on left wing, and they were almost an overlooked line. They were primarily the checking line, but they were amazing in that series.
Yeah. Well, they had very good goaltending too between Bauer and Sawchuk. I remember that vividly. Those two old veterans, they played like young kids. They were really valuable to the Maple Leafs and Punch and Rack with his band of veterans.
That's right. They had the ex-Ranger Alan Stanley on defense. They had the great Marcel Pronovo. I mean, they were an aging team that got hot at the right time.
That's right. Okay, now back to numbers. Which teams have the most and least retired numbers in the NHL? Well, the most belong to the Toronto Maple Leafs. They actually honored the most players, 19. Right. Okay. But there are 6 pairs of those 19 that wore the same number, and that's what's nice because, you see, teams were not in the habit of retiring numbers during the 30s, 40s, 50s. It was not in vogue then. Right. So the Maple Leafs, I'll give your listeners a quick example. The legendary Frank King Clancy wore number 7 in the 1930s. The great Tim Horton on defense played for Toronto for 16 years. He wore it as well. So they've retired number 7 for 2 players. They've retired 13 numbers altogether. Okay. Covering 19 players. But the better example for your listeners, George, the Montreal Canadiens have retired a sweater in honor of 18 players. Okay. But only 3 sets of those players wore the same number. So Montreal technically has retired the most numbers itself. They've retired 15. Okay. So 18 players, but 15 numbers. And to answer your question, it's funny, in between the piece coming out at the end of October and today, when I wrote it, there were 6 teams that had not officially retired a number. Wow. And now it's down to 4 because since my piece has come out, the Nashville Predators are going to retire the first one in franchise history in honor of Pekka Rinne. They're going to retire his number 35. Okay. He was a fantastic goaltender for them, clearly the best they've had in their short history. Sure. And as well, the ex-Ranger, Rick Nash, is going to have his number 61 retired by the Columbus Blue Jackets. He'll be the first player
in their history they're going to honor.
Right. Okay.
So in answer to your question, technically there are only 4 teams that have not retired a number yet, and they would be the Minnesota North Stars, San Jose Sharks, the Vegas Knights, and the Winnipeg Jets, although, as we all know, this is Winnipeg's second incarnation.
Winnipeg,
they had retired numbers from the World Hockey Association days.
Right. All right, but, sometimes it's not the quantity, it's the quality of the players who they're retiring numbers for. And as you have said, there's been numerous players who have been overlooked by quite a few teams, especially the original 6 teams.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about some of them?
Well, sure. I mean, I mentioned 4 examples, but because we're both great admirers of the Rangers' legendary general manager, Coach Emile Francis, who turned 95.
Yeah, that's right.
He turned 95 September 13th. Emile admired, when he was young, coming up, trying to make the NHL, Frank Brimsick, who won 2 Stanley Cups with the Bruins in 39 and 41. He also won 2 Vezina trophies as well as the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year. And for some unfathomable reason, not only hasn't his number been retired by the Bruins, but no goaltender in Bruins history has had their number retired. That includes Cecil Tiny Thompson from the late 1920s, and Jerry Cheevers, who was on the Bruins 1970 and 72 Cup champions. You look at the list of Bruins players, George, and it's an imposing list. But the fact that they've never retired one for a goaltender, I have to say, is a bit baffling.
Right. Even Eddie Johnston. I mean, he played for some really lousy Bruin teams, and he's the last NHL goaltender to actually play his full team's schedule. And he was a warrior, and he deserves some kind of honor.
Right. Right. I mean, I'll give your listeners a quick example of Calgary Flames, who, of course, started in Atlanta. They've been stingy. They've only retired 3 numbers, but one of them is for Mike Vernon, who was the goaltender when they won the Stanley Cup in the Montreal Forum. They won Game 6 on Forum ice.
Right.
Mike Vernon was fantastic, and then he went on to win a second cup with the Red Wings.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll mention another one. You have Chris Jelius, who was, talk about a warrior. He played defense in the NHL for 26 years, which, if you think about it, that's amazingly hard to do. I don't care what eras you're in. He played for 3 original 6 teams, Montreal, Chicago, Detroit. He won 3 Stanley Cups, but none of those 3 teams has retired his number. And I think in that case, the real reason is he didn't play 10 years with any one team. He came close, but he basically split his career among 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I don't know if, for instance, he won 2 of his 3 cups at the end of his career with Detroit. I don't know whether or not the Red Wings feel they've retired enough numbers or what, but I mean, I just can't see why they couldn't retire his number 24, because the Red Wings have never retired that one.
Yeah.
I mean, the compensatory thing for the 4 players in this section I mentioned, and I'll get to the other 2 in a minute, Brad Park and Joe Nieuwendyk, but at least all 4 are in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
But I think it's a little counterintuitive, don't you, George? If you're good enough to be inducted in the Hall of Fame, how can you not be good enough to have your number retired?
Yeah, you should be honored in some way. Like you mentioned, Brad Park. I mean, Brad Park to us, anyway, represents our youth. And he was such a great player for so long for the Rangers. And I really don't understand why they haven't retired his number yet.
I agree with you. And I mean, I think we've all been reading Larry Brooks's pieces in the New York Post over the last 2.5 years, banging the drum for Brad. And Larry did mention, which I think is more than fair, and it may be important, that when the NHL named its centennial team in 2017, Brad was among those 100 players, and he chose to wear a Bruin sweater. As he explained afterward, the only reason he did it was because he played more games as a Bruin than as a Ranger. I think that's fair.
Right.
But I certainly hope the Ranger organization does not hold that against him. That would be unforgivable.
Yeah, you think they would rise above that, yeah.
Because, of course, the only player of those 100 on the ice that day was Jean Rattel, who obviously wore a Ranger jersey.
Yeah.
But I know that you agree, George, and a lot of other people would, Larry Brooks would. You couldn't have a legitimate 100 best of anything in the NHL without Frank Boucher and Bill Cook being on it. That's just not possible.
Oh, that's right.
But, I mean, having been involved in sports at a high level for over 40 years, I'll just say that these kind of debates are a lot of fun. They stimulate discussion among the fans. But the through line for all of them tends to be whether or not the athlete is still alive. I mean, if Frank Boucher or Bill Cook were still with us, they would have been chosen.
Right.
Which to me is not a good enough excuse, but that's another conversation.
Yeah. And the fans don't know who these people are. Some of them, they're not interested in past history. They're interested in the game that's being played in front of them. And
that's right.
I think.
Yeah.
Years ago, I had been at a game, and they honored Bill Cook between periods. They gave one of his family members a framed picture of him, but they did it between periods when nobody was in the stands. They were all waiting to either buy beer or go to the bathroom, and the poor woman who was there for Bill Cook, no one was paying attention to it, and it's a shame because he was the original Ranger. He was the first New York Ranger picked by Conn Smythe, actually, and he became the first Ranger captain and the first Ranger superstar. But and also Frank Boucher. Frank Boucher spent his entire career with the Rangers as a player, as a coach, as a general manager, and he gave a lot of years to the Rangers, and he's been ignored.
Yes, I mean I'll say this: I'm not in contact with them often, but 3 or 4 of the most considered historians in Canada would all agree Bill Cook to them is the first iteration of Gordie Howe in the NHL. He was exactly like Gordie. Nobody even thought twice about trying to initiate hostilities with him. And
tough guy.
And of course, the media, things move on. By the 40s, he'd been forgotten. He'd been long retired. And then Gordie came along. But to them in Canada, Bill Cook was Gordie Howe. Thankfully, he won 2 Stanley Cups with the Rangers.
Yeah.
1928, 1933.
Good to know. And, as far as Emil Francis, Emil revived the Ranger franchise in the mid-'60s. If Emil had not come along, who knows where the team would be now. Emil was responsible for the Metropolitan Hockey League. He's responsible for the fact that we have a 3-team metropolitan area now. We have the New Jersey Devils and the Islanders. Without the interest in the Rangers that he regenerated, we would not have those other 2 teams. and
exactly.
he's forgotten.
Right, and the sad truth is this, George. When he was named to succeed Muzz Patrick as general manager, over the previous 11 years, the Rangers had finished either 5th or 6th in the 6-team NHL 8 times. Mm-hmm. They were a sad sack organization. Those are the facts.
Oh, yeah.
Now, 1964, the computer was not invented yet. Emile Francis had his computer in his brain and in his briefcase. He ran the Rangers' main team and their 3 farm clubs. As you know, back then in the early 60s, teams could also sponsor some junior teams in order to keep players in their orbit. But Emile ran everything out of his briefcase. Player contracts, leases, everything. He literally hired a brand new scouting staff personally.
Yeah.
He did everything himself. Literally. That's how bad things were.
Yeah, well, he also added teams to the Ranger system. Teams down in the minors and also down in the OHA and the other junior leagues in Canada, because we didn't have nearly as many as like Toronto had or Montreal had. We had a handful of teams, while all these other clubs had 7, 8, 9 teams. We had 2 or 3, and so we had to increase the numbers so we had more kids under our umbrella.
Protected list. That's right. And that was one of the key things Emile did, which I pointed out in my book. The Rangers used to have their top farm club at Guelph, Ontario, which was where Andy Bathgate and Harry Howe and Gump Worsley and all of those featured players came from. Emile moved from Guelph to Kitchener, Ontario, so that he was within the 100-mile radius of Toronto. Because in those days, Montreal and Toronto had first dibs on players within a 100-mile radius. Well, Emile had a farm team there. He could move and shuttle players in and out, and he could scout players there because he had a farm club established there. That was extremely intelligent on his part.
Right. But he was a smart cookie. He had a lot going on in his head. He was quite an admirable guy.
Yep. Well, I mean, I'm not sure, again, why the Rangers had waited or they took for granted they would one day possibly honor Emile, but it's just sad to think that we're sitting here even talking about it.
Right.
But let me just quickly, for your listeners, mention the other 2 players of these 4 that I cited. The third, of course, was Brad Park. Played 17 years in the NHL with the Rangers, Bruins, Red Wings. Never missed the playoffs. He was a 2-time first-team All-Star next to Bobby Orr. He finished the runner-up for the Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman 6 times. And yet, he's not worthy of having number 2 retired, which, of course, the Rangers have already retired for Brian Leetch.
Right.
But the Rangers, obviously, they have no hesitation to do that. They retired number 9 for both Andy Bathgate and Adam Graves, 19 days apart, I might add. And also number 11 for Mark Messier and Vic Hatfield.
Right.
So there's not an issue with retiring it for Brad. But, I mean, that to me, as you said so well, for those of us that grew up, I do like to think that, as Larry Brooks would say, we had not just skin in the game, having followed the Rangers for over half a century, but we have an inarguable case why it should be done.
Yeah.
And then the 4th player I mentioned was Joe Nieuwendyk, who finished his career as a New Jersey Devil, but he's one of 11 players in NHL history to win the Stanley Cup with 3 different teams. In his case, he won the Cup with Calgary in '89, Dallas in '99, and the Devils. And nobody's retired his number.
No.
So, I mean, it's just, I think of the fans that are old enough that have seen all of these players, followed them passionately, and it's a little bit of a sign of disrespect. I say that on a personal level because, George, you were there. You're paying hard-earned money to be in the building, game in and game out, whether they have a good team or not. You were always there.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I just don't understand the thinking, what the hesitation is, I'll be honest. And Brad knows that. I've told him.
Right. How about the Pittsburgh Penguins? They've been kind of remiss, too.
Oh, the Penguins. I mean, I have to say, the Penguins, they've been the stingiest of anyone. Yes, they retired Mario Lemieux's number 66, which is a slam dunk. Anyone could have done that. The only other number they retired was number 21 for Michel Briere. In the 69-70 season that I wrote about in 9 Goals, George, Michel, he finished 4th in the voting for the Calder Trophy. He was a center. He was clearly the rising star on the Penguins. That was only their 3rd year in the NHL after the 6-team expansion, and he was in an off-season automobile accident, wound up in a coma for 11 months before he passed away. But they have had a cavalcade of great players that they honor in their own Penguins, what they call Hall of Fame. They haven't retired their number, but they're in their own Hall of Fame. I mean, there are great players like the right wing Jean Pronovost, who in the 70s scored 40 goals 3 times. He was a terrific player. Ranger fans of a certain age, hopefully they might remember Ron Stackhouse, who we wouldn't have seen a lot of him on defense, but Ron Stackhouse was one of those glue players. He was there night in and night out, played hurt, never missed a game. He was good as gold.
Yeah.
And so, as I pointed out in the piece, the Penguins have withheld Jaromir Jagr's number 68 because Mario has said it will be retired once Jagr retires. And, of course, here we are as we speak. He's age 49, still playing hockey in Europe.
Still going. Yeah.
But of course, they still have now contemporary players that hockey fans today would know. I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury, who's playing goal for the Blackhawks. Sidney Crosby, still going strong. Geno Malkin, still going strong, along with Chris Letang on defense. Those 4 numbers almost certainly will be retired one day. But you're right. They've only retired 2 numbers, and the Tampa Bay Lightning have only retired 2.
Okay.
Including number 26 for the ex-Ranger Martin St. Louis. So, and I mean, although I will throw in the Arizona Coyotes really have been abysmal ever since they relocated to Arizona and Phoenix. Shane Doan's number 19 is the only one they've ever retired as a pure Coyote.
Right.
So, what can you say? I mean, the Rangers aren't alone in having deficiencies, but it is disappointing. But to hockey's credit, George, I have to say, they were the first to do it, and that led to other professional sports teams doing it.
Right.
For baseball fans in the audience, the first Major League Baseball player to have his number retired, again, was a result of tragedy, and that was Lou Gehrig retiring as the result of a nerve disease that we came to refer to by his name as Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And Lou had his number 4 retired on July 4th, 1939 at the old Yankee Stadium, where, of course, he uttered the immortal words, "I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth."
Yeah.
And as we speak, the Yankees have gone on. They've retired a total of 21 numbers for 23 players and managers. They've retired number 8 in honor of 2 players, 2 catchers, Bill Dickey and Yogi Berra.
Yeah.
As well, although it's slightly different, they've retired number 42 for Mariano Rivera, which came a few years after Major League Baseball retired number 42 across the league for Jackie Robinson.
Right.
And I will say, I mean, I don't mean to be critical of the NHL in any way, but I do think it's very interesting. Of course, Wayne Gretzky played his final game as a New York Ranger at Madison Square Garden on April 18, 1899. The following February, during the All-Star Game, February 6, 2000, the NHL announced they were retiring Gretzky's number 99 across the entire league, which was quite an honor.
Right.
But I have to say it does beg the question, because the NHL will never be accused of being proactive or forward-thinking. Would they have done that for Wayne if baseball had not done it for Jackie Robinson?
Probably not. No.
I think it's I guess we'll never know for sure, but I think it's a fair question.
Right. Okay. How about the old Madison Square Garden Hall of Fame? You mentioned that the Penguins had their own Hall of Fame, which is fine. But when New Garden opened up, they had a Hall of Fame, and I know I walked through it, and
that's right.
Now it's gone. Now they have the Walk of Fame, but that's kind of like a joke too. So why can't they resurrect the Hall of Fame and put all these players that they've missed in all sports back into the Hall of Fame?
They could. And I mean, as we all know, since the New Garden was refurbished most recently, the concourses are nice and wide for food and beverage, for souvenirs. There's plenty of room to walk around before or between periods. They could put plaques along a certain section, maybe the mezzanine on that level, and they could go all the way around that same level. And as you said, honor athletes that have competed at the Garden over the decades, and they could make it into a destination for fans to go.
Right.
There's no question. And then you could include Emile Francis. You can include a lot of players. I mean, I didn't see him in the 50s. I was too young. But when Gump Worsley was a Ranger, I think we know now how good Gump Worsley really was.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a shame that they had to trade him to Montreal and watch him win 4 Stanley Cups. But when Gump played with the Rangers, as you well remember, when he was asked what team gave him the most trouble, he said the Rangers.
That's right. Yeah.
He was a tremendous goalkeeper.
Right. It actually worked out better for him when he got traded, because he would never won any Stanley Cups with the Rangers. That's true.
Oh, it sure did. And as you remember, the year before, the Rangers had a rookie goalie that had spent a lot of time in the AHL, the old American Hockey League, with the Cleveland Barons. The Rangers called him up. He had a great rookie year. He didn't make the team the next year because they sent him down in favor of Gump. His name was Johnny Bauer.
Johnny Bauer.
And he went on to win 4 Stanley Cups in Toronto.
They called up Bauer that year because Gump won the Rookie of the Year award the year before, and he asked Frank Boucher for a raise, for a measly $500 raise. And, he got sent out to the West Coast. He got sent to, I think, Vancouver of the WHL. And they called Johnny Bauer. And as you said, Bauer had a great year. So.
Well, there you go. I mean, these are all, and let's not forget, because he won the Hart Trophy as a Ranger, which is almost impossible to do, but when Chuck Rayner led the Rangers to the 1950 Stanley Cup Final, he won the Hart Trophy as the league MVP, and then took the Rangers. He took the Rangers to double overtime in Game 7 in the Olympia when they did not have a single home game at Madison Square Garden for the final.
No.
I mean, you could easily, there are 3 goaltenders that would be, to me, in the MSG Hall of Fame without even thinking about it.
Yeah. But, it's true. There's a lot of players who are just overlooked and forgotten. I'm writing a book now about the Frank Boucher era Rangers, and Chuck Rayner's in there, and Gump Worsley, and all those guys, and they all had great, as Rangers, they had good careers. And in the case of Worsley and a couple other guys, they moved on. Alan Stanley, he was booed out of New York, and he went to Boston, and then he went to Toronto. And he won a bunch of Stanley Cups up there. So
Yeah, and I don't want to let it pass without mentioning probably the most obvious of all, George, because when the Hockey News did a special issue and it turned into a book in 1997, they recognized the top 100 goaltenders of all time. And there was a debate, should the legendary Dave Kerr be in the Hall of Fame, which he's not. Because he only won 1 Stanley Cup, but that just happened to be with the 1940 Rangers when he won the Vezina for Frank Boucher.
Right.
And so Dave Kerr could easily be in an MSG Hall of Fame. I mean, without even blinking. But he was a terrific goaltender. As you know, he retired early for the same reason. The Rangers wouldn't pay him what he felt he was worth.
Yeah, so he went out and he retired, and he got himself a full-time job. Yeah,
that's right.
And he has family to support. So
that's right. But Dave Kerr, I mean, I've talked to just some editors on the Hockey News staff informally, and they're far younger than we are.
Yeah.
But they've all said, in any judgment of a Hall of Fame in any sport, and no matter who you talk to, longevity is a critical component.
Yeah.
Your statistics has to be a critical component. And the third one is, did you ever win a championship?
Right.
And of course, we can go right through the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I have to say, in all fairness, there are a lot of players there that were terrific that never won a Stanley Cup, including some of the Rangers that we're so passionate about: Jean Rattel, Rod Jobert, Brad Park, Ed Jockerman.
Right.
But Dave Kerr did win a Stanley Cup and a Vezina. He won a major NHL award.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually the fourth criteria. Did they ever win a major trophy?
Right. Do you think the problem with Kerr was that he didn't get the backing from the Ranger PR department after he left the team to get him into the Hall of Fame? Do you think that had anything to do with it?
You know what I have to say, because remember, his career ended in the 40s. I don't really think that public relations, on the sense that we know of it today with social media and everything, I don't think that was really a focus, if you want to be honest.
Okay.
I don't think that would have mattered, but I do think, and this is where I have to mention our great mutual friend, the late John Halligan. He never gave up trying to get Harry Howe and Andy Bathgate's numbers retired by the Rangers. John was dogged, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the great thing was, he pulled it off. He prevailed upon Glenn Sather on February 22nd, 2009, in a dual ceremony. He got the Rangers to retire number 3 for Harry Howe. And as I mentioned in the piece as well, number 9 for Andy Bathgate, which had been retired for Adam Graves 19 days earlier.
Right.
And the great irony was, February 22nd, 1964, to the day, 45 years earlier, was the day that Andy was traded with Don McKenney to Toronto in the famous 7-player deal.
Yeah, big deal.
But again, it was important that both Harry and Andy were still alive, their families could be there, and thankfully John Halligan did something that always has to be remembered by those of us that are still here.
Well, as far as Halligan, too, you mentioned him, and, we both love the guy. And I always thought that, if you're going to honor somebody, you should hang a well-tailored plaid sports jacket up there for John Halligan, because he was the Rangers to a lot of us. He would meet you, he would remember your name, he would give you a big hello when he saw you walking in the garden, and he was he was part of the team. He was as much a part of the team as any one of the players or the coaches back then.
That's right. And of course, he and Stan Fischler together won the Lester Patrick Trophy for service to hockey in the United States.
Right.
And of course, with Stan being inducted into the United States Hockey Hall of Fame, I've really always thought that John should get strong consideration for that.
Right.
Because you're right, what he did with the Metropolitan Junior Hockey Association along with Emile really reverberated through the decades. Yeah. I mean, there was a player that literally came off the street through there, named Chris Ahrens, Ahrens. He was a defenseman. He was a very good friend. He was a very good friend of Emile's 2 sons, Bob and Ricky. Chris Ahrens had a quick cup of coffee with the Minnesota North Stars.
Right.
All because of what Emile and John did.
Yeah.
So it's things like that really, I think it's worth honoring, whether this generation of fans can truly relate or not. Because as I said, George, the two of us have been around long enough that the passion we had then was valid, and it's still valid for the same reason.
Right. They're part of us. We just can't get rid of it. We can't shake it. We try, but it's still there. It just won't go away.
No, it's true. It's true, but I mean, as I said, if you look at those 4 criteria: longevity of career, statistics, winning a major NHL award, or winning a Stanley Cup. The only thing Brad Park didn't do was win a Stanley Cup, but he was in 3 finals. He was in 1 with the Rangers and 2 with the Bruins.
Right.
And then I will say this, because next year will be the 50th anniversary of Team Canada's great victory over the Soviet Union. Brad was part of the best defense pair on Team Canada. He played with Gary Bergman of the Detroit Red Wings.
Right.
Brad was on his habitual right side. Gary played the left side. But if you remember, Bobby Orr had a knee injury. He couldn't compete. Okay. And there was scrutiny on Brad Park. I mean, a lot of the hockey writers in Canada were saying, well, we don't have Orr, but now Brad Park can show everyone how great he really is. And you know what? He did.
He did, yeah.
And so to a lot of players, I mean, I was just reading about it the other day. I mean, Dennis Hull, when Vic Hadfield left Team Canada because he wasn't getting enough playing time, went home to Canada, Dennis Hull became the left wing on that line with Jean Rattel and Rod Gilbert.
Yes. And
after they won Game 8 with 34 seconds to go on the famous goal by Paul Henderson to win the series for Canada, 4 victories to 3 for the Soviets with 1 tie, afterward in the locker room, Dennis Hull asked Yvan Cournoyer of the Montreal Canadiens, is this better than winning the Stanley Cup? And Yvan Cournoyer's answer was, this is 100 times better.
Yeah.
And let's remember, Yvan Cournoyer won 10 Stanley Cups, as did the legendary Jean Beliveau, and their longtime teammate Henri Richard won 11.
Yeah.
So when it came to Stanley Cups, Yvan Cournoyer knew what he was talking about.
Yes. As old Ranger fans, we can't imagine that. Winning 10, 11 Stanley Cups. It's just unfathomable.
Well, I have to say, I think you feel the same way, George. I will be eternally grateful that I have one.
Oh yeah, I know. In 1994, I figured, well, that's my job. I was able to see the Rangers win the Stanley Cup. I fulfilled one of my dreams, and the rest of the generations now who follow the Rangers, it's up to them to carry on now. I did my job, so it's up to you now. So.
Right, and I have to say, and with all humility, I never take it for granted. I will always be thankful.
Oh yeah, hockey. You never know. Those last couple of seconds when they kept bringing the puck back, it just was so long. Even now when you watch a replay, I still get antsy when I'm watching that third period, and when they just kept bringing the puck back, and scary stuff. But we won. It's over.
Well, it's over, and we can laugh now, but as you remember, there were 2 icings in the last 12 seconds.
Yeah,
one of them should never have been called. It should never have been called. The game should have ended right there.
Yeah.
And then we had to endure those 1.3 seconds of agony with Craig McTavish taking the last face-off against Trevor Linden.
Right. Well, there was a play in the game before that in Vancouver that gave me confidence that the Rangers might pull this series out. I forget who shot it, but somebody shot the puck right through Mike Richter's crease, right through from the left side to the right side. Went right through. It got past Richter and it went right through his crease. And the puck went through the crease. It didn't hit a stick. It didn't hit a skate. It didn't hit a chip on the ice and go in. It just went right through. Now, normally in other years, that puck would have went in the net somehow. Somehow it would have ended up in the net. This one went right through, and it came out the other end, no goal. And I thought, well, maybe this is it,
Whatever it takes.
Yeah.
But one last thing, George, I did want to mention, just because I think it's interesting for anyone that's superstitious with numbers or trends. Punch Emlak, who led the Maple Leafs to their 4 Stanley Cups in the 1960s, of course, was a very unpleasant guy. He basically drove Frank Mahovlich out of Toronto.
That's right.
But Punch's lucky number was 11. And when Ron Ellis made the Maple Leafs as a rookie, Punch gave him number 11. And Ron tied Frank Mahovlich that year for the team lead in goals with 23. And so here we are the next season. Punch goes to Ron and tells him, well, we have another rookie coming up by the name of Britt Selby. I want to give him your number 11. And basically Ron Ellis said, fine. Punch gave Ron number 8. And Ron Ellis had worn number 8 when he won the 1964 Memorial Cup with the Toronto Marlboro, so he was fine with that. And as I mentioned earlier, 2 seasons later, Ron would go on to wear Ace Bailey's number 6 for him. And so anyway, Britt Selby wears number 11 in the 66-67 season, wins the Calder Trophy, Rookie of the Year. Okay. I'm sorry, 65-66, I'm sorry. So number 11 struck again. Then, when Punch was fired by Toronto, he became the first general manager of the brand new expansion Buffalo Sabres. And this is 70-71. Buffalo came into the NHL along with the Vancouver Canucks. When Clarence Campbell very famously spun a roulette wheel, Buffalo won the spin, so they got the first ever draft pick of those 2 franchises. They chose Gilbert Perreault from the Montreal Junior Canadiens. And obviously, you can tell by now, Punch gave number 11 to Gilles Perreault, which he made famous. He won the Calder Trophy and went on to the Hall of Fame, scored 512 goals.
Right.
So it's just funny how, a number can follow a player around or certain players.
That's
and
right.
as we look back in history, the power of that number really means something.
Yeah.
And again, which to me is why number 2 for Brad Park should be hanging in the garden rafters.
Got that right, sure. Yeah. Okay, Reg. Thank you very much for coming on. A very interesting show. I love talking to you. And
it was a lot of fun.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it. I hope our listeners enjoyed it. And we'll have you on again soon. So happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone else out there. And
continued great luck with Retro Rangers.
Thank you very much. All right. Take care.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.